In the summer of 1941, as the German Wehrmacht advanced deep into Soviet territory, soldiers began sending confused radio messages to their commanders. They reported encounters with a tank they couldn't identify, one that simply refused to die. Anti-tank guns bounced off its hull like pebbles. Machine gun fire had no effect whatsoever. Even direct hits from early Panzer cannons left nothing but scorch marks on its armor. This machine would soon become legendary among both Soviet crews and German tankers. A tank that weighed over 45 tons, carried thick steel plates on every side, and brought a powerful gun to the battlefield. A tank that the Germans, at that time, had no reliable way of destroying head-on. This is the story of the KV-1, the Soviet heavy tank that terrified the Wehrmacht during the early years of World War II. In this documentary, we will explore how the KV-1 was engineered, why it was nearly unstoppable during the opening months of Operation Barbarossa, and what made it one of the most influential armored vehicles of the entire war. We will break down its armor layout, its suspension, its powertrain, and its weapon systems. We will analyze its combat performance, the tactical doctrines around it, and the real battlefield episodes where a single KV-1 stopped entire German units. This is not a myth. This is engineering, battlefield physics, and war history. Historical background, beginning. To understand why the KV-1 was so revolutionary, we need to look at the landscape of tank development in the late 1930s. At that time, most nations were still fielding lightly armored vehicles. Germany relied heavily on the Panzer I and the II tanks, equipped with machine guns or small 20mm cannons. Even the more advanced Panzer III, which was just entering widespread service, carried a 37mm gun that struggled against heavier armor. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, was experimenting with a radically different philosophy of armored warfare. They believed in deep offensive operations, large, mechanized breakthroughs requiring tanks that could survive prolonged battlefield exposure. Because of this, Soviet designers began pushing toward heavier and more survivable vehicles earlier than most other nations. One of the key stepping stones in this development was the T-28 medium tank, a multi-turreted design that provided valuable experience in armor layout and mechanical systems. But Soviet engineers quickly realized that if they wanted to create a breakthrough tank capable of smashing through fortified lines, they needed something far more durable. This led to the creation of the SMK and T-100 prototypes, massive, multi-turreted heavy tanks. However, while these machines offered impressive firepower, they were mechanically complex and difficult to operate. The breakthrough came when designers at the Kirov factory proposed a simplified version, a heavy tank with only one turret, but armed with a powerful cannon and protected by thick armor. This design was lighter, more reliable, easier to operate, and faster to produce. That tank became the KV-1, named after Kliment Voroshilov. Part 2. Rise of the KV-1, Development and Early Testing. By the late 1930s, political tensions in Europe were rising quickly. The Soviet military knew that a major war was coming, and they needed armored vehicles capable of surviving modern anti-tank weaponry, not just fighting light reconnaissance forces. In 1939, when the Red Army fought in the Winter War against Finland, the limitations of older Soviet tanks became painfully clear. Light tanks struggled to survive hits from even modest Finnish anti-tank guns. Thin armor cracked in freezing temperatures. Engines struggled in Arctic conditions. Machine gun-armed tanks were useless against fortifications. The heavy tank prototypes, SMK and T-100, were deployed and tested in limited numbers during the conflict. Both machines showed promise in armor protection, but they suffered from complex multi-turret layouts and poor mobility. Their large frames were difficult to maneuver in forests and rugged terrain. Worse, the mechanical demands of multiple turrets caused reliability issues. But one more tank was sent to Finland, an early version of the KV design, and its performance impressed everyone. The KV prototype showed that a single-turret heavy tank with strong frontal armor and a powerful cannon was far more practical than multi-turret monsters. It could traverse forests, withstand hits, and engage both infantry and fortifications. Engineers immediately knew they had found the right path. Official adoption and pre-war production. By 1940, the Soviet High Command approved the KV-1 for mass production. At this point, it was one of the most heavily armored tanks in the world. Its armor thickness, 75 mm on the front, was astonishing for the time. This made it nearly immune to most contemporary anti-tank weapons. The official doctrine intended the KV-1 to serve as a breakthrough tank vehicle that would punch through enemy defensive lines, absorbing fire that would cripple lighter tanks. It was not meant to be fast or agile. It was meant to be indestructible. Even before Operation Barbarossa erupted in June 1941, the KV-1 was seen as a strategic asset. It represented Soviet confidence in deep offensive operations, massive mechanized thrusts designed to overwhelm enemy defenses. But production numbers remained limited. The Soviet industrial base was still adjusting to the demands of heavy armor manufacturing. Many KV-1 units were delivered with reliability issues, incomplete accessories, or rushed components. Still, when the German invasion began, the KV-1 became one of the most feared sights on the battlefield. Sensei, the first battles, the shock to the Wehrmacht. When German forces crossed the Soviet border on June 22, 1941, they expected to encounter vast numbers of light and outdated tanks. Their anti-tank doctrine was based around dealing with lightly armored vehicles like the T-26 or BT series. What they did not expect was a tank whose armor could shrug off their standard 37mm Pak-36 anti-tank gun. German anti-tank crews soon discovered that their rounds could not penetrate the KV-1 from the front or sides. Even close-range shots often failed. German commanders called the Pak-36 the door knocker because shells simply bounced off the KV's armor with a sound resembling someone knocking on a steel door. Reports described tense battlefield moments where KV-1s advanced slowly but relentlessly, absorbing dozens of hits before firing back. For many German soldiers, this was their first encounter with the harsh reality of Soviet heavy armor. Transition to engineering analysis. To understand why the KV-1 performed so well in these early encounters, we must examine its engineering. In the next section, we will break down the tank's armor layout, main gun, turret design, suspension, transmission, and overall mechanical structure. We will see how the KV-1 was built not only to survive incoming fire, but also to deliver significant firepower against almost any target it encountered in 1941-1942. Part 3. Engineering Analysis. Why the KV-1 was nearly unstoppable. To understand why the KV-1 shocked the Wehrmacht in 1941, we need to look at its engineering with clear technical eyes. Every aspect of the KV-1's design, its armor layout, structural geometry, thickness distribution, was built with one priority: survivability. Not speed, not crew comfort, not strategic mobility. Pure, raw battlefield survival. Says the armor layout. A moving steel bunker. The KV-1's armor was revolutionary for its time because it didn't rely on clever angling or special steel types. Instead, it used an extremely simple concept. Make the armor so thick that nothing short of a heavy gun could penetrate it. Let's break this down. Frontal armor, 75 mm. This was thicker than any German tank in 1941. Panzer III, 30mm, early Panzer IV, 30mm German 37mm, Pak-36, at gun useless. Even 50mm guns struggled at combat ranges. Side armor, 70mm, this is especially important. Many tanks of the era had thick frontal armor but thin side plates. The KV-1 had almost uniform protection around its hull. Turret armor, 75mm front, 70mm sides. The KV-1 turret was essentially a steel block with little concern for weight savings. Rear armor, 60mm, even the rear was more armored than the front of many German tanks. Roof and belly, 20-30mm, much thicker than most competitors. The design philosophy. Most countries built tanks that prioritized speed, economy, ease of production, ease of maintenance. The Soviets built the KV-1 around a different philosophy. A heavy tank must survive being hit. Everything else was secondary. The result was a vehicle that German forces simply weren't prepared to counter. In many early battles, KV-1s soaked up dozens of hits without noticeable damage. The quality of armor steel. Another factor often overlooked is Soviet metallurgy. The KV-1 used homogeneous rolled steel, known for good impact resistance, stable hardness, reduced brittleness in cold temperatures. German armor-piercing ammunition, especially early war APCR, was designed for thinner plates and often shattered or deformed upon hitting KV-1 armor. This wasn't just theory. German after-action reports repeatedly stated, "Our rounds bounce off at almost any angle." Physics and geometry. No complex angles, but a lot of mass. Unlike the later T-34, which relied heavily on sloped armor, the KV-1 used vertical plates. At first glance, this looks like inferior engineering, but there's a reason behind it. Vertical plates are easier to manufacture, easier to weld, less likely to create internal stress fractures, more predictable under ballistic impacts. And when they're 70-75 millimeters thick, sloping becomes less important. The armor didn't need clever angling. It simply overwhelmed incoming fire with sheer thickness. The result on the battlefield. This design created a tank that in 1941 was immune to the 37mm Pak 36, could withstand the 50mm KWK-38 from Panzer IIIs, resisted early 75mm shells from Panzer IVs at many ranges, survived repeated hits from German anti-aircraft guns unless fired at close range, forced Germans to use artillery in direct fire mode, sometimes required engineers to plant explosives directly on the tank. In many encounters, the KV-1 became a moving fortress, advancing slowly but relentlessly, absorbing fire that would destroy entire platoons of lighter tanks. This armor advantage shaped the KV-1's battlefield reputation and forced Germany to rethink its tank doctrine. Part 4. The firepower of the KV-1, the 76 mm F-32 Chow F-34 gun. Heavy armor was only half of the KV-1's battlefield power. The other half was its 76.2 mm cannon, a gun originally designed for infantry support, but adapted to tank warfare with remarkable results. During its production life, the KV-1 used several versions of 76mm guns. The earliest KV-1 models mounted the F-32 cannon, and later variants upgraded to the ZIS-5. These guns shared similar ballistic performance and provided the KV-1 with a powerful, versatile weapon, capable of engaging both armored targets and infantry positions. Let's break down the gun's capabilities. Ballistics and shell types. The KV-1's 76mm cannon fired several primary types of ammunition. 1. Armor-piercing BR-350A, BR-350B. Penetration depended on range and shell type, but on average, 60-70 mm of penetration at 500 mm, up to 90 mm at short range with improved APBC rounds, around 50 mm at 1,000 m. This was more than enough to destroy any Panzer III or early Panzer IV at typical Eastern Front combat distances. 2. High explosive OF-350. The HE shell was extremely effective against infantry, bunkers, anti-tank gun positions, light vehicles. A direct hit often destroyed crews instantly. 3. Shrapnel and fragmentation rounds. Used less often, but valuable against entrenched infantry. Rate of fire and crew operation. Inside the KV-1's turret, space was tight, much tighter than in German tanks. However, the rate of fire for a trained crew was 6-8 rounds per minute. This was competitive for the era, especially given the large caliber. The loader had to work in a cramped, dimly lit space, with ammunition tucked into compartments along the turret's interior. This reduced comfort, but not effectiveness. Optics and target acquisition. One area where the KV-1 lagged behind German tanks was optics. Soviet PT-6 and TOD sights, functional but basic, limited magnification, lower clarity than Zeiss optics, acceptable but not exceptional for long-range accuracy. Compared to German sighting systems, the KV-1's optics were less precise, especially past 1,000 meters. But early war combat on the Eastern Front rarely took place at long range. Most engagements happened between 300 and 800 meters, where the differences in optical quality were less impactful. Turret Traverse System. The KV-1's turret used a manual traverse system, which meant slow rotation under fire, slower target tracking. Difficult corrections while moving German tanks often had powered or semi-powered traverse, giving them an advantage in turret response time. This meant a KV-1 had to plan its engagements deliberately. The tank excelled when firing from a stationary position, ambushing, breaking fortified lines, or supporting infantry. It was not designed for fast, fluid tank duels. Real-world performance against German tanks. Let's break down how the KV-1's gun performed in actual combat. Against Panzer III, the KV-1 could penetrate any Panzer III variant from virtually any distance the gun could reach. Against early Panzer IV, short-barreled 75mm, the KV-1 had a clear advantage. KV-1 could penetrate the Panzer IV at 800-1,000 meters. Panzer IV often needed dangerously close ranges to harm a KV-1, and even then, the KV-1's frontal armor was extremely difficult to defeat. Against German AT guns, the 37mm Pak-36 was almost useless. The 50mm Pak-38 was marginal at best before late 1941. Only the famous 80mm Flak consistently penetrated the KV-1, usually used in desperation. The firepower summary. The KV-1's 76mm gun gave it destructive power against all early German tanks, strong He effect for infantry suppression, reliable penetration at medium range, versatility against fortifications. Combined with its armor, the KV-1 in 1941 and 1942 was arguably the most dangerous single tank on the Eastern Front. Part 5. The heart of the KV-1. Engine, transmission, and suspension. The KV-1's armor and firepower made it a battlefield giant, but its mobility systems engine, gearbox, and suspension were the source of both its strength and its weakness. To understand this heavy tank fully, we need to explore how it moved, how it handled rough terrain, and why its mechanical systems caused so many complaints among Soviet crews. Jet the engine. The V2K diesel. At the core of the KV-1 was the V2K, a V12 diesel engine producing roughly 600 horsepower. This engine was a modified version of the one used in the T-34, tuned for greater output to compensate for the KV's heavier weight. Why a diesel engine? The Soviets were pioneers of diesel-powered tanks. Diesel provided better fuel efficiency, lower fire risk compared to gasoline, higher torque at low RPM, better cold weather performance. This was a critical advantage on the Eastern Front. Power-to-weight ratio. Here lay the KV-1's biggest issue. At nearly 45 tons, the KV-1 was extremely heavy. With 600 horsepower, its power-to-weight ratio was only 13 HP per ton. For comparison, T-34, 18 HP ton. German Panzer III, 15 HP ton. Panther, later war, 15 HP ton. This meant the KV-1 was slow to accelerate, difficult to maneuver, sluggish on soft terrain, prone to bogging down in mud or snow. Transmission, the KV's notorious weak spot. If KV-1 crews wrote complaint letters, most of them were about the gearbox. The KV-1 used a crash gearbox, non-synchronized transmission, which required perfect timing, precise clutch use, strong physical effort, mechanical intuition. Even experienced drivers struggled with it. Common issues reported by crews: gears grinding, difficulty shifting under load, overheating, mechanical failures after long marches, jamming in rough terrain. Soviet drivers joked, KV transmission teaches patience or ruins your arms. In battle, these issues became dangerous. If a KV-1 stalled or failed to shift while maneuvering, It could expose itself to flank shots or heavy guns. Suspension, the torque tube Christie variant. The KV-1 used a variant of the torsion bar suspension which offered excellent shock absorption, smoother ride than leaf spring systems, durability on rough terrain, but the KV's suspension had to carry twice the weight of medium tanks, leading to frequent breakdowns in early models, high stress on road wheels, track tension problems during long marches. Tracks. The KV used wide tracks for its size, giving it decent flotation on snow and mud. But because of its enormous mass, even wide tracks couldn't fully prevent sinking in soft soil, getting stuck in swamps, difficulty climbing steep slopes. The KV-1 was a fortress, but a fortress that didn't always want to move. The steering and drive feel. Controlling a KV-1 was physically demanding. Steering was accomplished through controlled braking of each track, requiring considerable effort. Drivers frequently described heavy controls, intense vibrations, loud mechanical noise, fatigue after long distances. Operating a KV-1 was not elegant. It was work, hard, physical work. Why designers accepted these problems? The Soviet design philosophy prioritized armor, survivability, firepower. Mobility was secondary. The engineers knew the transmission would break. They knew the engine would strain. They knew the tank would be slow. But their logic was simple. Better a slow tank that survives than a fast one that dies. On the battlefield, this philosophy paid off during the first stages of the war. Despite its mechanical faults, the KV-1's protection made it one of the most feared tanks of 1941-1942. Part 6. Crew, Interior Layout, and Combat Operation. Operating a KV-1 was not just about driving a tank or firing its 76mm gun. It was a team effort requiring perfect coordination between the 5 crew members. Commander oversaw battlefield decisions, target selection, communication. Gunner aimed and fired the main cannon. Loader supplied shells to the gun, maintained steady firing. Driver maneuvered the tank through terrain and obstacles. Radio operator, hull machine gunner, handled communication and fired secondary weapons. Commander's role and limitations. The commander had an extremely challenging job, observing the battlefield from a small command cupola, which limited visibility, coordinating with multiple machine guns, and the main cannon. Communicating via voice tubes or radio, often under heavy enemy fire. Because the KV-1 was large and slow, the commander had to anticipate enemy movements. Delayed decisions could result in vulnerability to artillery or flanking attacks. Says gunner and loader dynamics. The gunner relied on a simple, non-stabilized sight, which meant firing accurately while moving was difficult. Precision engagements were possible only at medium ranges. High stress during German counterattacks. The loader had the physically toughest role. Shells weighed 607 kilo each for AP rounds, and He rounds were even heavier. Inside the cramped turret, with limited space and high stress, the loader maintained a steady fire rate of 6 to 8 rounds per minute, crucial for effectiveness in tank duels. Driver and mobility concerns. As previously discussed, the KV-1's engine and transmission were powerful but difficult to manage. The driver needed skill and endurance, constantly adjusting clutch and gears, navigating rough terrain without stalling, maintaining track tension, avoiding mechanical overload during long marches. A skilled driver could make the KV-1 agile enough to execute flanking movements or reach firing positions. A less experienced driver risked immobilization and catastrophic exposure. Thus had a radio operator and hull machine gunner. The 5th crew member had dual responsibilities. 1. Communication, relaying commands, and receiving intelligence from other units. 2. Hull defense, operating a 7.62mm DT machine gun to protect the tank's front and flanks. Effective coordination between these roles allowed the KV-1 to function as a self-contained combat unit, capable of both offense and defense. Interior design and ergonomics. Life inside the KV-1 was cramped. Crew members often had to work in tight, hot, noisy conditions. Armor thickness and large turret size reduced visibility. Limited hatches and escape routes made survival in catastrophic hits difficult. Despite these conditions, the KV-1's interior was organized for function. Ammo stored along turret and hull sides for quick access. Controls arranged for efficiency despite size. Engine compartment isolated to prevent excessive heat in the crew area. The KV-1 rewarded discipline and coordination, punishing mistakes harshly. How crew interactions determined battle outcomes. A well-trained KV-1 crew could absorb multiple hits from Panzer III and IVs, engage multiple targets with main gun and machine guns, execute ambush tactics or defensive maneuvers effectively, withstand artillery strikes that would destroy lighter tanks. Conversely, mechanical issues or miscommunication could neutralize even a perfectly armored tank. In essence, the KV-1 was only as effective as its crew, and early war Soviet crews learned this quickly through trial, error, and survival under fire. The Part 7. Legendary combat episodes of the KV-1. The KV-1's reputation was not built on theory. It was forged on the battlefields of 1941-1942 in encounters that became legendary among both Soviet and German forces. The KV-1 versus the Panzer columns. In the opening days of Operation Barbarossa, small KV-1 detachments frequently clashed with advancing German panzer divisions. One remarkable episode occurred near the town of Raseiniai in June 1941. A single KV-1, commanded by Sergeant Semenov, held a road junction. German Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, supported by infantry and artillery, attempted to advance. The KV-1's frontal armor shrugged off, repeated 37mm and 50mm hits. Its 76mm gun destroyed multiple German tanks and immobilized others. The KV-1 blocked the entire German column for nearly 24 hours, despite fuel and ammunition limitations. German after-action reports described it as a steel monster we could neither flank nor destroy. It forced our retreat and disrupted the entire advance. This story was not unique. Similar accounts appeared across the Baltic and Northern fronts, where KV-1s acted as force multipliers, disproportionately affecting German operations. Urban and forest fights. The KV-1 was particularly effective in urban combat. The tank's armor could withstand panzer cannon fire at short range, allowing it to push through streets with minimal risk. Forest engagements. Despite its size, the KV-1 could navigate wooded areas better than anticipated, using its mass to crush obstacles and block ambushes. In both scenarios, German infantry and artillery often had to resort to Molotov cocktails, satchel charges, or 88mm guns to neutralize a KV-1 rare and resource-intensive measures. Individual heroics KV-1 crews frequently performed acts of extraordinary bravery. Captain Schablin, in a KV-1 during the defense of Leningrad, reportedly knocked out 6 German tanks while sustaining multiple hits, returning to base with a crippled engine. Private Ivanov survived a frontal hit from a 50mm gun that destroyed a neighboring tank, repairing the KV under fire and rejoining combat the same day. These stories contributed to the mythos of the KV-1, a nearly indestructible tank with crews who could exploit its strengths under impossible circumstances. Lessons learned by the Germans. German commanders quickly adjusted tactics, concentrated fire from multiple tanks and AT guns on a single KV-1, employed 88mm flak guns in direct fire mode, attempted to immobilize tanks by attacking tracks and suspension. Even with these adaptations, the KV-1 remained a major threat for months, until new weapons and tactics could be fielded in 1942. The KV-1's strategic impact. The combination of armor, firepower, and psychological effect had strategic implications. Slowed German advances along critical roads and railways, forced panzer divisions to divert forces to neutralize individual KV-1s, bought the Red Army precious time to organize defenses and retreat strategically, created an early fear factor in German armored units. The KV-1 was not just a tank, it was a mobile fortress and morale multiplier for the Soviets, a nightmare for the Wehrmacht. Part 8. Weaknesses of the KV-1. Despite its legendary armor and firepower, the KV-1 had several critical weaknesses that influenced later design and tactics. 1. Mechanical reliability. Early KV-1s suffered frequent gearbox failures, broken road wheels, and engine overheating. Long marches were particularly hazardous. Tanks often broke down before reaching the front lines. 2. Mobility limitations. Low power-to-weight ratio limited acceleration. Maximum speed? 35 km/h on roads, slower off-road. Difficult to maneuver in swamps, mud, or urban streets. 3. Turret limitations. Manual traverse made target tracking slow. Limited sighting range, reduced accuracy at long distances. Cramped interior affected gunner efficiency. 4. Production complexity. Heavy armor and powerful engines required more resources and labor, slowing production. Mechanical issues meant some units were non-combat ready, reducing overall battlefield availability. Evolution, KV-1s, and later variants. To address weaknesses, Soviet engineers introduced the KV-1s in 1942. Weight reduction and 10 tons lighter, improved engine, V2K tuned for better mobility, thinner armor, slightly reduced protection in exchange for speed. Enhanced turret design, faster traverse, better ergonomics. The KV-1S retained offensive punch while improving maneuverability, making it more suitable for dynamic battlefield conditions. Other experimental modifications included improved transmissions, reinforced suspension, new armament with higher velocity 76mm guns. These variants aim to combine the indestructible nature of the KV-1 with better reliability and tactical flexibility. Comparisons with German counterparts. Panzer IV, short-barreled 75mm, could not reliably penetrate KV-1 frontal armor. KV-1 often destroyed Panzer IVs before they could return fire effectively. Panzer III, 37mm or early 50mm, completely outclassed by KV-1 armor and firepower. Only ambushes or flanking shots could threaten it. Tiger and Panther tanks, later war. Heavier German tanks eventually outgunned and outranged KV-1s. By 1943, KV-1s were technically obsolete in direct confrontation, though still effective in secondary roles. Strategic lessons. The evolution of the KV-1 demonstrates several key principles. 1. Armor-first design can have disproportionate impact early in a conflict. 2. Mechanical reliability is critical. A slow, well-protected tank is useless if it cannot reach the battlefield. 3. Iterative improvements. Like the KV-1S can, extend battlefield relevance even as enemy technology catches up. The KV-1's legacy influenced the later IS series heavy tanks, which carried forward its philosophy: maximum protection, strong firepower, survivability at all costs. Part 9. Strategic and psychological impact of the KV-1. The KV-1 was more than just armor and firepower. It was a psychological weapon. Its presence on the battlefield had profound effects. 1. On German troops. Instilled fear and hesitation among tank crews and infantry. Forced changes in tactics, requiring multiple units to neutralize a single KV-1. German reports repeatedly mention the invincible steel monsters that slowed entire offensives. 2. On Soviet troops. Provided confidence in defensive and offensive operations. Served as a morale booster, knowing that their heavy tanks could withstand most German fire. Encouraged daring maneuvers and counterattacks. Operational impact. During the first months of Operation Barbarossa, KV-1s disrupted German armored spearheads. Individual KV-1s often halted entire panzer columns for hours or days. Their ability to survive repeated hits meant that Soviets could hold key positions longer than expected. This operational impact bought critical time for the Red Army to organize counterattacks, evacuate civilians and resources, strengthen defensive lines. Without the KV-1, German forces might have advanced faster and deeper into Soviet territory in 1941. Influence on future tank design. The lessons of the KV-1 influenced the design of future Soviet tanks. ICE series heavy tanks emphasized heavy frontal armor and powerful guns. T-34 evolution, balanced mobility, armor, and firepower based on battlefield experience. Soviet armored doctrine reinforced the principle that survivability can outweigh speed, particularly in breakthrough tanks. Western engineers also took note. The KV-1 challenged the assumption that medium-caliber guns could handle all armored threats. It inspired tactical changes in combined arms warfare and anti-tank measures. Moral and legacy. The KV-1 became a symbol of Soviet resilience. Stories of KV-1s holding roads against dozens of German tanks spread quickly. Crews were celebrated as heroes for exploiting the tank's strengths. Even today, the KV-1 is remembered as one of the most iconic heavy tanks of World War II. Its legacy is clear. The combination of armor, firepower, and the courage of its crews made the KV-1 a formidable battlefield force, reshaping early Eastern Front encounters. Part 10. Conclusion. The legacy of the KV-1. The KV-1 was not perfect. Its mechanical issues, limited mobility, and cramped interior were serious challenges for its crews. Yet despite these flaws, it achieved something remarkable. It changed the battlefield dynamics of the Eastern Front in 1941-1942. Its thick armor made early German anti-tank weapons nearly useless. Its 76mm gun allowed it to dominate medium German tanks. Its crew coordination and discipline turned it into a formidable fortress, capable of holding entire sectors of the front. The KV-1 was slow, heavy, and sometimes mechanically unreliable. But on the battlefield, it was a survivor. It could absorb punishment that would destroy any other tank and continue fighting. This quality gave Soviet forces time and space to regroup, counterattack, and eventually push back the invaders. Lessons learned. The story of the KV-1 teaches us several timeless lessons. 1. Armor and firepower can outweigh mobility in critical situations, especially in breakthrough operations. 2. Crew training and coordination are just as important as the machine itself. 3. Engineering compromises. Favoring survivability over speed can decisively impact early war outcomes. 4. Innovation in crisis can produce machines that reshape strategy and morale alike. Historical impact. The KV-1's influence extended beyond its own service. It delayed German advances, altering operational timelines. It inspired the IS heavy tank series, cementing a Soviet philosophy of heavily armored, powerful tanks. It became a symbol of resilience, demonstrating how a single technological advantage can influence the course of a war. Final thoughts. In the end, the KV-1 was more than a tank. It was a statement of intent, a concrete embodiment of the Soviet Union's determination to resist and survive under overwhelming odds. Its legend is built not only on its armor and firepower, but on the stories of the crews who operated it, the engineers who designed it, and the battlefield encounters that turned steel and mechanics into history. The KV-1 reminds us that sometimes in war, the combination of ingenuity, courage, and raw resilience is unstoppable. And in 1941, nothing embodied this more than the indomitable Soviet heavy tank, the KV-1.